More than 3 years, the world continued to follow the war in Ukraine. Now, given the fact that after the fallout between US President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky, the war is just getting more complicated. Now, at this moment, the international community continued to ask the questions. For example, must Ukraine accept ending the war no matter the terms? Or does it have the ability to influence them? Another question, can it expect any long-term security commitment from the US to guard against the future Russian aggressions? Or does it have no option but to unconditionally halt its operations? When we look at the international conflicts, right now today, we also link to another word is democracy. How fragile is our democracy today? And also, what about the relationship between democracy and resilience? Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Professor Kurt Weyland. Professor Weyland is a Mike Hogg Professor in the Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. Based on research conducted in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Peru, and Venezuela, Professor Weyland has published many journals and also book chapters. One of his amazing books is called Democracy's Resilience to Populism's Threat. There you go. Well, Professor Weyland, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Yes, I'm very happy to be with you and speak to you about this very important topic.
Absolutely. Professor Weyland, I want to get started. I think today when we talk about democracy, most of us are very much familiar understanding that the complication of the democratic system, not just in the US, but around the world. But one thing that we have to bring into our conversation is the relationship between democracy and the resilience today. So how do we understand that? Because today we're seeing that some of the leaders around the world are trying to challenge the democratic system. But meanwhile, we still don't understand what is the correlation between democracy and resilience. Help us understand more.
So what you see is with populism, a new type of threat has emerged to democracy, which is a threat from the inside. And that makes it very complicated and difficult to assess, because it used to be that democracy was threatened from the outside by coup-hungry generals, by left-wing guerrilla movements that used armed force. But what we have seen is that democracy also has a certain inherent weakness, because it allows for the free and competitive election of leaders who then abuse their power to concentrate power, to push up against checks and balances, to harass the opposition, and who in that sense kind of abuse democracy to try to suffocate it from the inside. And so democracy in some sense allows for its own adversary or enemy to rise. And that means that the resilience of democracy then depends on the structures that can contain this expansive, power-hungry populist leadership. And so what you see is the stronger the institutional framework is, the more you have checks and balances that can limit this expansive, transgressive drive of populist leaders, the more democratic resilience do you have. And the other factor is the less these populist leaders can benefit from special opportunities to extend their mass support, because the main political asset and resource is mass support. You see that they always look at opinion polls that try to demonstrate their mass support in a number of cases through plebiscites and constant elections. So if they can win extraordinary high levels of mass support, they're more dangerous. And so essentially, democracy depends on institutional firmness, on governance that doesn't provide these opportunities for populist leaders. So it is a complicated struggle, and it is a a difficult issue to assess because these populist leaders, of course, claimed a popular mandate. That's what President Trump does now, right? And so it's difficult for democratic opposition forces to know what is a legitimate move of these populist leaders and where does their expansion, their effort to win more power, turn into a threat to democracy. I mean, you see that going on right now in the United States. Are Trump's measures to obtain more authority? Is this just a normal power struggle in a checks and balances system, or is this a real threat? And at what point, do you have to be really worried?
Professor Weyland, it's rather fascinating that to see what Donald Trump is doing in America. Now, again, going back to what you mentioned before, when we talk about checks and balance, we understand there's something that fundamental that has to be understood about all American citizens or around the world is the Constitution. And we know that this is one of the most fundamental, one of the most irreplaceable founding documents as the guardrail for the country. So from your perspective, when we talk about resilience of democracy, what about the role of the Constitution? I mean, again, not too long ago, if I'm not mistaken, after being elected, Donald Trump claimed that during their campaign rally, there is a good possibility that if voter wants, hypothetically, he could run for the third term. But of course, based on the Constitution, and that is not going to happen. So again, such rhetoric, it's getting more and more populated around the leaders and also around the beliefs within the international community. So Professor Weyland, from your perspective, what is happening to the Constitution, and can we still believe that Constitution can serve as the protection of democracy, or as a watcher to make sure that we still have democracy and also to understand the flexibility of democracy? Your thoughts?
So your point, in some sense, to the ultimate foundation of a country's institutional framework, because, when you think of democracy, checks and balances, the rights of Congress, there are a lot of aspects that are negotiable, a lot of aspects that could be changed with specific laws, even executive orders, right? But ultimately, the institutional framework rests on the Constitution. And you highlight something that is very, very important, because the role of the Constitution is quite significant. So in that book that I mentioned, I examined 40 populist governments across Latin America and Europe, and I find that in 7 of those 40 cases, these populist leaders actually managed to strangle democracy. And what is the interesting finding that speaks to your question about the Constitution is in 5 of these 7 cases of destruction of democracy by a populist leader, the real break point, the decisive point, was a profound, early, quick transformation of the Constitution. That's what Orban did with the supermajority in Hungary in completely legal ways. That's what Chavez did with Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, with pushing and shoving in Venezuela. That's what Alberto Fujimori did more transgressively after making an auto coup, self coup. But what we see is the flexibility, the plasticity, the malleability of the Constitution was very important for the destruction of democracy in those cases. So when you then look at the United States, a rock-solid constitution that has been around for 240 years, that's extremely difficult to change. When you think of the American Constitution, was approved in 1787, 1791, they added the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Since then, in about 230 years, they've approved only 17 more constitutional amendments. So very difficult to change. One of those amendments is what you mentioned, this 22nd, that enshrines the 2-term limit. So to change that is practically impossible. Now, could it be disrespected? I doubt it very, very much. Something that fundamental. current struggles with Donald Trump. To what extent can he block spending authorized by Congress? To what extent has to execute a congressional mandate? What is an impoundment? There's a lot of kind of bargaining power and certain gray zone or whatever. On running for a third term, after you have a constitutional amendment that says maximum 2, would be a massively blatant transgression that for that to happen would be, I think, extremely difficult. There was a recent poll in the Washington Post, because one issue is Donald Trump is being blocked by a whole bunch of court rulings. And so the poll says, ask the American people, do you think Donald Trump should comply with court rulings, even if they're against them? And despite the profound polarization in this country, the intense partisanship, 84% of Americans, that means 5 out of 6, which means about 2/3 of Republicans said yes, he needs to comply with a court ruling. Now, of course, transgressing the Constitution on such a fundamental point would go to the Supreme Court. And for Donald Trump and the Supreme Court, I think it would be extremely unlikely that they would allow him to transgress an explicit constitutional amendment. And the Supreme Court, of course, has 3 judges appointed by Donald Trump. So for him to defy a ruling of the highest court on a constitutional rule, including defying 3 people who he himself appointed, I think it is practically impossible. So one thing that you have to see is, and that makes it, I mentioned, this new inside attack on democracy by populist leaders is not easy to figure out. And one of the additional complications is these populist leaders talk, and they talk very big. If you saw that address to Congress, this is the greatest golden age and we have achieved more in 43 days than other presidents, brag, big talking. And you see the same thing. There's a lot of and you never really know, is it just a joke? Is it a trial balloon? Is it a serious proposal that is being launched? Is it just grabbing attention? So Donald Trump talks a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff coming out. I'm going to take the Panama Canal and I want to conquer Greenland and I want to turn Gaza into a Riviera, and I want to run for a third term. Does he actually mean it? Does he intend it? Donald Trump is obsessed with being the center of attention. And one way how you are the center of attention, you talk a lot of big stuff that is completely crazy in some sense. So very hard to figure out when he talks, it would be kind of cool to have a third term. Is he designing a plan to achieve that? Is it just one of these sort of fireworks that Donald Trump burns off just to have fun? And I think he likes provoking people, poking people, drawing attention, riling people up. He wants to draw a response from the resistance. And so, so it's very hard to figure out, is this part of a plan? Is it just, if you can excuse the American term, I'm not American, it's just bullshit, right? Boof, talk, talk.
Well, Professor,
Americans use the term for nonsense. You talk nonsense.
Of course. Well, Professor Weyland, again, you brought up several great points. Now, I do want to continue our conversation. Let's talk about another critical element when we talk about the resilience of democracy, and of course, along with the concept of populism, which is the word economy. And we know that today, especially no matter where we live, economy top the agenda. And no one would like to see, or no one would like to understand, to be undermined when we look at this economic agenda. But without getting into economic sense, from your perspective, Professor, how do we understand that someone such as Donald Trump, someone such as Viktor Orban, and also any other populism believers or leaders, they use economy as the way to get to the voters, or they use economy as the way to really engage with the voters, but after being elected, again, recent polls showed that more than 60% of the American voters are not quite happy about what Trump is doing with the economy. So from your perspective, again, how do we understand the factor of economy when we look at the concept of a democracy, resilience, and we understand that this transformation from one type of government to another type of manipulation to the system? Your thoughts?
So this is a very important topic as well. Let me first say one thing. I think the economy is important, and I think it played a significant role in Trump's amazing re-election. But for populism, especially this right-wing populism, kind of cultural, moral issues are also very important. You know, you mentioned Orban, family values, anti-LGBT, similar for Donald Trump, the anti-transgender, the devastating campaign ad they had, like, you know, the Democratic Party talks about they and them, and we talk about you. So the economy is only one part. Second point, populist leaders use promises, use grievances in very strategic and instrumental ways. And so they're very flexible and very opportunistic. They're not inherently committed to a certain economic policy or economic approach. It used to be so you see, there's some populists who are left-wing and anti-neoliberal. There are some that are right-wing and neoliberal. There are people like Donald Trump, who is not neoliberal, but he's nationalist and protectionist. There are some who, like Viktor Orban, combine economic policy with social protection, really taking care of people. There are some, like Donald Trump, who in some sense have a strange mixture, internationally, economic nationalism, domestically still pandering to some of the Republican agenda of tax cuts and of, you know, benefit cuts, like maybe now cut Medicaid. And so the economy is, there is not a kind of populist program about the economy. First, so the second thing, of course, is that you know, it's very early in the Trump government. It's not up for re-election, and I mean, many governments take measures in the economy that are not immediately popular, hoping that there would be later benefits. So when you think about something, so Donald Trump, you know, he was bragging even in Congress recently, you know, the price of eggs, he would bring prices down. I mean, first of all, that's nonsense, because how does a president bring prices down in a market economy? But the other point is his tariffs, of course, risk raising prices, right? So what Donald Trump must then kind of hope for is that early on economic measures might not please his voters, but he hopes, of course, you know, tariffs would bring manufacturing and would create jobs. And so in the medium and long run, he would find approval. Because these populists, they're glued to approval ratings and popularity ratings. But in the economy, you know, economics, sometimes you have to take kind of early measures that are not that palatable, hoping, you know, the old neoliberal short-term pain for long-term gain. And I mean, when you think of tariffs, not many people benefit directly from tariffs. That's and right. So that is a measure that he hopes would have medium and long-term benefit. And so the fact that right now he doesn't have majority approval on the economy, I don't think that is a very important thing. I mean, there is, however, a fourth aspect, which is, in some sense, the most amazing genius of Donald Trump is that he, as an extremely rich person rolling around in luxury, has managed to persuade many not very well off working class Americans that he is their spokepiece, which from a, you know, if you came from a Marxian point of view, why does the underclass, the lower class, vote for ultra-rich bourgeois, right? I mean, it's really surprising. So in that sense, of course, you know, Donald Trump, many people make the argument, many people dispute the concept of populism by saying he's actually a plutocrat. He's not working for the people. He's working for himself and his business friends. And I mean, he's shamelessly using presidential office for personal enrichment. In his first term, he made foreign heads of state stay in his hotels, charge him exorbitant rates for the rooms, make money off of his personal, of his public position. So in that sense, there is something that, Donald Trump was elected based on the idea, I will pursue the economic interests of the people, the less well-off people. And, it's very questionable that, except for kind of sort of re-election popularity things, he really wants to raise the well-being of the people rather than enrich himself.
Well, Professor Weyland, I have two more questions before letting you go. I know your time is very busy at this moment, so I'll keep the questions short. Now, let's talk about another word when we look at resilience in democracy. It's the word loyalty. Let's go back to 2016. That was the first term under President Trump. Trump directly fired former FBI Director James Comey, and it was because of the word disloyalty. Now, when we look at the second term, and again, it's not even up to 100 days yet, how important it is, go back to Donald Trump and go back to Viktor Orban and also the leaders in also all those Latin American countries. How do we define the word loyalty and how important it is for those leaders continue to polish or continue to hold on this belief that if you're loyal to me and I am going to grant you the wish, just like robbing the bottle of a genie box, right? So in other words, you follow me and you listen to me, I'm going to be good to you. And remember, Donald Trump is a straight shooter, and he took on social media. He said it before, if you come at me, I'm going to go after you. But for the people who are genuinely loyal to Donald Trump and loyal to Viktor Orban, or even look at Vladimir Putin today, there's a type of sense that democracy cannot be challenged simply by loyalty. Democracy has to be protected and based on fairness. So according to your idea, or according to your analysis, Professor Weyland, what is the concept of loyalty today when we look at democracy? And why do you think that it matters to people like Trump and like Orban and also like other people that you mentioned?
So this is a very important feature of populism. So in my book, I employ a political strategic definition of populism, not ideational, not the people versus the elite, but revolving around leadership. And I characterize this leadership by two features, and one of them is personalistic. Populism revolves around personalistic leaders, these domineering, headstrong leaders who think that in their person, they incarnate the will of the people, that they are designed by providence, by destiny to be the leaders, and that therefore they can do whatever they want. And that means they're not institutional, they're not organizational, they're personalistic. And personalistic, if you want to build a team that can help you enact your ideas and proposals, you need to somehow or other build a team with the glue that holds it together. So in regular governments, you have party discipline, you have technical competence. Populists use personal loyalty. As personalistic leaders, they are obsessed with appointing loyalists. You see that again, populism of the left, populism of the right, which is very deleterious for public administration and technocracy because they don't care about experts, they don't care about merit, they don't care about knowledge. They try to throw these people out in order to appoint loyalists. And that is what Trump did over time in his first term, initially because he was inexperienced and, still had a whole bunch of kind of more experts, and also appointed them to his cabinet, and over time booted them out and replaced them more and more with loyalists. In his second term, he has been much more brutal in that sense by, from the beginning, appointing people who by any standard are utterly incompetent, utterly unprepared. Pete Hegseth, has no real experience in running a military organization. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, what does she know about intelligence? RFK Jr., right? I mean, essentially some crazy shaman who is running the health system based on, strange ideas, but they're loyal. So you see that very much done in the second Trump government, and I think the impact on performance, public administration, quality will be very deleterious. Now, you emphasize loyalty. The interesting thing about Donald Trump in his first term, we don't have to experience it in his second term, is the loyalty was extremely one way. Extremely one way. Donald Trump demanded total loyalty to himself. But as soon as he thought that somebody was diverging a little bit, he trashed them. He insulted them. He tried to destroy them. So this is, usually assume you are friends with somebody and you are loyal. Even if they, commit something, do something to you that you don't like that much, you have trust, you try to treat them fairly, you might talk to them, but it's not like, that you just trash them. And so Donald Trump expects total loyalty to himself, and he shows ultimately very little loyalty to his underlings. I've been surprised that hasn't hurt him more, because what person in their right mind would want to run the risk to work for Donald Trump and then get trashed when they're thrown out? I forgot the name of his attorney general in his first government, the former senator from Alabama, who he had appointed. He was the first, I think, senator to embrace Donald Trump, and then he
Professor, you mean Jeff Sessions?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So he then recused himself from the Russia investigation, and Donald Trump thrashed the guy and accused him and called him a traitor and tried to destroy him, right? And so you see again the megalomania and fullness of Donald Trump. It's almost like everybody has to pray to the God, and if the God doesn't like you, it will unleash his wrath and destroy you. And so it's loyalty. Loyalty in some sense implies mutual commitment. It implies reciprocity. For Donald Trump, it's completely asymmetrical. You are loyal to me on my terms, and if I have the slightest doubt, I show utter disloyalty to you.
Professor Weyland, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, your amazing book is called Democracy's Resilience to Populism's Threat. Last question, going back to Donald Trump. Not only he's very much interested in running domestic affairs, also his administration has interfered international elections as well. Again, we look at current Vice President J.D. Vance during the Munich Security Conference, and very openly criticize what's happening in the European countries, and especially in Germany, and again, indirectly telling people that it's important to understand this ADF ideology, etc. So from your perspective, Professor, final question briefly, how much influence or impact do you think someone like Donald Trump or Trump administration can actually influence other countries' economic or even political progress? Because at this moment, we know it's important that we need to focus on what's happening right now. But it seems like they're so busy with any other interests. So I want to hear your final thoughts. And are we going to see more changes because of Donald Trump from any other countries? Or these are just political sound bites and we don't really need to pay attention, or at least not at this moment? Your final thoughts.
So I think Donald Trump might have an impact in political and party systems that are more fluid. He has really supported Javier Milei of Argentina. Argentina, a fairly fluid party system, a democracy that's not consolidated. In a case like that, boosting him might have an impact. Or, in his first government, he supported Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. In a country like Germany, what you have is I think if Donald Trump had won for election in Germany, he would have lost 90-10. People dislike them. I mean, I'm German. When I talk to my mother, who is a conservative person, whatever, she hates Donald Trump. So for Donald Trump to speak out, I think that might backfire more, that might hurt the politicians more whom he endorses than it helps. And you see the election result of that AfD, the right-wing populist party, didn't change very much at all. It was right in line with the polls. I would, in many cases, right-wing populists do better than the polls predict because there is social desirability bias. People don't want to admit it to the pollsters. The AfD did like slightly better than the poll predicted, but didn't have the normal jump. And so I wouldn't even be surprised if like J.D. Vance's endorsement had hurt them, because people are like, no, if Donald Trump, endorses them, this is really not what we want. So in many European countries, because they have, as you mentioned, right-wing populist parties, and many of the establishment parties have essentially exorcised them. In Germany, call it the firewall. You don't talk to them. Cordon sanitaire. They are considered, not reputable, uncouth, and whatever. So if a foreign leader comes and endorses them, I really don't think it will have a very big impact, because if it gives a little boost to their supporters, it also gives a little, boost to their adversaries. And at best that will cancel out. As I say, it might actually hurt them in those established democracies.
Well, again, Professor Weyland, we don't know what will happen to the US and as well as other countries around the world. But again, there is no doubt that populism continue to pose threat to democracy. And of course, it's rather alarming just to pay attention to what's happening domestically and also internationally. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Professor Kurt Weyland. Again, Professor Weyland is the author of this amazing book called Democracy's Resilience to Populism's Threat. Well, Professor Weyland, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you so much for your insight. And we love to have you back on the show as we continue to talk about democracy, resilience, and also international affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.